Now, to join us to talk a little bit more about Disney is Dr. Mary Cuff, who is a writer over at Crisis Magazine. She's an independent scholar, a wife, and a homeschooling mother. She holds a PhD in American literature from the Catholic University of America and is published in the Southern Literary Journal and many other places. She also teaches online high school on classical rhetoric courses at Homeschool Connections. Dr. Cuff, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And you wrote this fascinating article here over at Crisis Magazine talking about how we should boycott Disney to save our child's soul. What inspired this article?
Well, I was thinking about all of the people currently facing the idea of what Disney has become. It's become a little bit hard to ignore the reality that Disney is trying to push an agenda to our children. And so many parents feel like there's no other option, right? Like Disney is almost like a utility service. Like it's where you get your electricity, it's where you get your water, it's where you get stories for your children.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, but it's not. It's really not. It makes us feel that way. But we do have options, and we don't have to just sort of grin and bear it or deprive our children, right? If we want to have alternate stories, actually boycotting Disney is not just a sacrifice we have to be willing to make. It's actually a great opportunity to get our children better stories and better entertainment, honestly.
You know, Dr. Mary Cuff, when I was younger, I am ashamed to admit that I was obsessed with Disney, like way too much, like not very disorderly obsessed with Disney. And to a point that it was very disordered. But, looking forward now, I'm like, I can't even watch a Disney movie. I can't buy a Disney product. We went to Florida, my family and I, and when we were there, and we were like, we're just going to avoid everything and anything Disney in Florida because it's all just trying to attack our children, our families, and they hate what is good and they love what is evil. How did this shift happen from this golden age of Disney where you're talking about stories of like Snow White to now having same-sex couples do things in their movies and have these kind of pushing these woke ideology subtly in their movies? How did we get from there to here?
Well, unfortunately, it's been going on longer than we'd care to admit. I did my fair share of Disney as a kid too. I mean, I think every kid growing up in the 90s fell in love with the what's called the Disney Renaissance, right? All the movies that we think of, the classic Disney princesses and Aladdin and all that. But behind those movies, which we think of as much more innocent compared to the very overt stuff that's in movies now, those movies were already beginning to pave the way. If you think of any of the songs, really, and you attach it to a modern identity politics headline, it kind of, the songs in the classic Disney movies were getting us to think about love in very sort of flat, modern, secular ways. They took these stories that are ancient stories of our culture that are great stories, and they changed them slightly. And actually, there's a deliberate, it's not a tin hat, oh dear, like looking back, the people who were in charge of Disney then were LGBT. They were out and proud gay men. Howard Ashman is the driving force behind what's called the Disney Renaissance, and he was gay. He died of AIDS. His partner collected his Academy Award for Beauty and the Beast. These are the people writing the themes of these stories. And if you think about, oh, I love this person and I cannot marry them because of unfair laws that will magically change. Well, that's what they wanted in their own lives too, and they started paving the way.
Yeah, when I think about that golden age, the Renaissance of Disney in the 90s, I mean, it does strike me as a bit flamboyant now that I look back at it. There was a lot of flamboyance in the characters and the music and a lot of things that were somewhat subtle, and for children, it's easy for them to internalize. Now, I love this article because I've just recently become a father, and my daughter is...
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. She's less than 9 months old. She's very, very close to her first birthday. But I think about it as a father. Everything that we have at our disposal can either be used for good or evil. And when we look at raising children, I think it's a modern sensibility for us to want to have an opportunity to, kind of let the child sit in front of the television for a while and just kind of entertain themselves while we go and do something else, because it's very difficult to raise children. But I think about Disney, and I say, wow, like I can't trust them anymore. And I love what you say in this article, that boycotting Disney shouldn't be a sacrifice. It shouldn't be a sacrifice. We shouldn't view it as like, oh, it's hard. Instead, we should view the boycott as a great good in itself. In other words, to lead with virtue. So what is the good that we can benefit by ousting the mouse? This obviously is going to be very hard for certain parents to do.
Well, so yes, it will be hard. Parents who want to still, find quality entertainment for their kids, let them have a little bit of screen time, are going to have to do a little bit more legwork. But the great benefit is that there are amazing stories out there that Disney has sort of hidden because, we think of them as the place to go for stories, but there are beautiful stories written for children, designed for children, that we can introduce our children to. Take The Little Mermaid, for instance. The original story is about a mermaid who doesn't have an immortal soul because she's not human, and she learns about what souls are. And the whole story is her trying to find one and to get one because she wants a soul. Is that in Disney? No. But it's an amazing story. It's beautiful. And it has these themes in it that really resonate, not just with, oh, this is a powerful story, but with what we're trying to teach our children. And so dumping the mouse and going back to the stories the way that our ancestors told them, our ancestors who had our same or very similar desires for our children, this is an opportunity to reconnect with beauty and with stories that actually support what we want our children to have.
I would love to ask what alternatives there are to these Disney films. And in this article, you mentioned the Hungarian version of Cinderella, but you also mentioned one of my favorite shows when I was growing up, which was Samurai Jack. Can you talk a little bit about that?
My kids love Samurai Jack. I didn't know about it growing up, but it's these old, sort of forgotten shows that are not really mainstream anymore. They don't have merchandise connected to them. People aren't making tons of money off of these shows anymore, but they're just gems. They're stories that teach virtue. One of my favorite episodes of Samurai Jack, I watch it with my kids and we talk about the themes. There's these kids that have gotten sort of mind trapped by this demonic music that is this way of the evil villain of the show, Aku. It's his way to trap these children and turn them into his mind slaves. And Samurai Jack, this sort of ancient warrior who's been zapped to the future, ends up battling these microphones and boom boxes to save these children. And I was like, what? How did this get allowed in modern television? But it's cool and it's fun.
That's very interesting, because one thing that I noticed is that, stories about people are kind of a rarity. Stories about great people. And I'm thinking of, like, wouldn't it be so cool to have like a TV series about King St. Ferdinand and things like that? Like, that'd be so amazing. But instead, we get all these stories about animals, anthropomorphizing animals. And of course, Aesop's fables, all those things existed before, and they involved animals that kind of had human elements to them. But I feel like in Disney, the anthropomorphizing of animals has led to almost an egalitarianism where we see animals as humans and humans equivalent to animals. Oh, dogs have feelings, animals have emotions and interior lives. And so it leads to all these other errors that we have. And I'm thinking of most clearly in Tarzan, whenever the song You'll Be in My Heart, whenever they says, why can't they understand the way we feel? They just don't understand what they can't explain. I know we're different, but deep inside us, we're not that different at all. And it's basically saying that monkeys and humans, or I guess gorillas and humans are the same. Ultimately, we are mostly the same. So what do you say about this whole thing right here?
Well, the joke with the movie Inside Out is now emotions have emotions for Disney, and yes, I think that's very true. Where we've sort of Disney has flattened things out and made it so that kids can't think about distinctions. Two of my favorite people in the world, J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, they saw this coming early with Snow White, actually, and they were very grumpy about that movie. They saw it as talking down to children, talking down to the viewers, and they said, wait a minute, like Western storytelling, even Western storytelling for kids traditionally has challenged us. It has made distinctions. It's made those hard differences between right and wrong. And so many times in Disney movies, the villains are just misunderstood or need to learn, or, that can be true, but sometimes evil is evil and must be defeated. And so, stepping away from Disney, we could try to find that again. Whereas, the over equating everything with everything that Disney has done, we get kids who don't want to eat chicken because, one of my favorite Disney characters is a chicken. I mean, I had that problem as a kid. I was very sad learning where meat came from because all my favorite characters were animals. Not that we can't have stories about animals, but yeah, it gets overdone.
Yeah.
Dr. Cuff, you mentioned earlier how, Disney's writers and songwriters and scriptwriters began changing stories and planting ideas in songs, and how this has been going on for a long time. Our listeners who aren't aware might be interested to know you actually wrote an article about this. It's still on the Crisis Magazine website, where the title is "Disney Has Been Corrupting Kids for Decades," where you give a few more examples. And historically, American parents were able to, or thought they could trust Disney as a family-friendly entertainment company, and parents weren't scrutinizing the content that their children were consuming. And so your article does a very good job of giving examples of where screenwriters and songwriters were planning, and this is key, very subtle messages, subtle enough that very young children would absorb these ideas uncritically, because young children aren't capable of very critical thinking. Meanwhile, parents are busy, and they don't think that they have to scrutinize what their children are watching and listening to if on the surface it seems acceptable and it's coming from a company like Disney. So it's good to see that somebody with your credentials has gone out there and started to discuss how this has really been going on for decades, and it helps explain how we got where we are today, where parents in many places around the country are in open rebellion against their school boards.
Right, and I call this Disney morality. It's I'm sure some of them knew exactly what they were doing. Some of them were just well-intentioned, not very good thinkers, but every step of the way has been paving the way towards where we are now. And, my parents' generation, not knowing what was around the bend, they could have us watch Tarzan and just think, it's cute. But, this, don't judge us. We love each other. We need each other. One day people will understand, sort of message that Disney's been giving us for going on 40 years now.
Wow.
Now you see, in this cultural context, children hear that. Their parents tell them this is a cute love story, and then they see at school teachers saying, we love each other, don't judge. And what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to have a consistent message, and they're getting one. It's just not the one we want them to have.
That's an excellent take. And, to really bring this home, what was being said in the 90s was very subtle in comparison to the things that are out today that Disney is promoting. Among some of those things are their outward association and support of the LGBTQ agenda, as well as drag. I mean, there's been instances where they've promoted so-called drag queens and just really degenerate things to children. So it's a really real reality that your children may be exposed to certain things that will destroy their soul. Again, it's very difficult to get rid of something like that. Parents who have a lot of screen time for their children, it's very, very hard to consider that. But like you said, there are alternatives. But the other side of the coin too is that something you mentioned a few minutes ago is children. It's very obvious children don't really know how to discern things. I mean, they're just coming into the age of reason. And another thing that's really egregious that Disney does is the way that they overstimulate them with advertising in stores. I mean, I've had experiences where I've seen children just melt down when they go into the store and they see things that feature their favorite franchise and their parents deny them. It's an overstimulation. What do you say about that?
That's sort of the other problem with Disney is this sort of materialistic culture it's introducing our children to early. Meltdowns that you got me the wrong princess dress. I needed this one and not that one. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not how that's supposed to work. Or the need to have this or that. I was at the grocery store the other day and this kid was throwing a temper tantrum because his mom put the wrong mac and cheese in the cart, and it wasn't a taste or flavor or health thing. It was
I hate when that happens.
The wrong character on the box. And we shouldn't be raising our children to be this attached to things. Disney, part of its marketing model is to get children hooked on all the stuff that's associated with the characters that they have fallen in love with. And I think there's a danger to that in and of itself, because stories shouldn't be about opportunities to sell people more things. Mm-hmm. And that is the Disney model and has been since very, very early on.
What about because you mentioned earlier about the dumbing down of children's stories, and what about the Grimm's fairy tales and things like that? Because I know I started reading the Grimm fairy tales fairly recently, and I was like, whoa, is that really children appropriate? Like, they're reading this to kids? And I'm just curious, like, what would you say to those kind of things? Like, maybe that is appropriate, and that's something that the kids need to be exposed to at that age. But I'm not sure. What say you?
Well, so going back to my favorite guy, J.R. Tolkien, he actually talks about this in his essay on fairy stories, and he says, children are interested in themes like justice, and if you deny character justice at the end, children will notice it before adults do. G.K. Chesterton said, adults want mercy, children are more innocent than us, so they desire justice. Amen. And these older stories, sure, they're grim, right? Most of them are not too grim. There are some stories that I would say, okay, let's hold off on that one. But we're introducing our children to stories because we want them to grow up, not because we think that they deserve to sort of sit in this fantasy land that will get harshly broken up at some point. Yeah, the world isn't like that, kids. And so I introduce my kids to stories that have themes that Disney would say, we can talk about gay stuff, but let's not talk about death, right? It's like, no, let's talk about death because my children have had friends who have died. We need to start talking about stories that have real things in them.
Yes, and the kids can handle it, They can. They really do. They think of how many things they memorize about a particular franchise. They can handle these things. So maybe it's time to consider that. Dr. Cuff, thank you so much for joining us today and discussing why we should consider getting rid of Disney and saving our children's soul. That's going to wrap us up for the first hour, but we're going to be back with more breaking news, good news story, and our game show, Fear and Trembling. Don't go away. There's more Catholic Drive Time on the way.